The office employs not just prosecutors, but investigators, for
Right.
example. Do you have experience evaluating those people or even managing those people? Or is there a way to look at the performance of these people who, in my mind, maybe tend to be forgotten?
Yeah.
And in addition to evaluating the performance of
Sure.
prosecutors.
I've worked with investigators even as an intern at the office, because in Harris County, and I think every prosecutor relies on DA investigators to do the stuff that they either can't do or don't have the experience to know how to do. There's a lot of intuition that old cops have that prosecutors just don't have and they need. And the network that these experienced law enforcement officers have is just amazing. So I've been working with investigators for 12 years in both in trial courts. In my appellate work, I do a lot of post-conviction investigation in terms of actual innocence claims, DNA-based claims, on death penalty cases, responding to mental retardation issues and having to go out and research that. Lots of cases where we have victims of violent offenses, usually sexual offenses, who want to come back and recant their testimony. And so as an appellate prosecutor in that case, you have to go out and find the story behind the story, and you've got to go out and figure out what's caused this person to change. And that's where we rely heavily on investigators who know the community, who have years of experience working with folks in Harris County and down here in Galveston County, who know people all throughout the criminal justice system that can bring that experience in. There's only 4 investigators at the Galveston County DA's office, and there's 40 prosecutors. And that's just too few for those investigators to be able to do all that their potential has for them. And I know that there are budget limitations, and I know that our county's in a tough financial time right now. But one of my goals is to increase that ratio, because investigators are a tremendous resource. And if you've got someone who wants to work with prosecutors and bring all the wisdom and experience they have, it's a phenomenal asset to the DA's office. And I'd like to see the number of investigators increase over the years.
What about caseload? 40 prosecutors handling that many cases. How does that compare to the caseload in Harris County? And
I haven't done a statistical comparison, again, anecdotally. I've talked to a lot of prosecutors, former prosecutors from the Galveston County DA's office, and their stories are comparable to what we have up in Harris County. I believe we've got about 220, 240 prosecutors right now up in Harris County. And a lot more cases being filed, obviously, but trial prosecutors just have a large caseload. And that's part of what comes with the game. I think one of the keys to reducing that goes back to the leadership issue. Because if your prosecutors have to constantly come back and check with the elected DA before they can dispose of a case, then you've got a bottleneck. And if the elected district attorney has a mindset that he has to have some say in the disposition of all these cases, then things don't get resolved. And the way to deal with that most effectively is to equip your people and trust them. Make sure you've got people that have good judgment, and then let them do that job. And if there's a problem that comes up, then you deal with the problem. But having to make sure that every decision that's made has to be fed through this filter at the highest level in the office only slows things down. And I think that would be one way of addressing the caseload issue.
Jay, how about you?
I think you've answered most of my questions about is the attitude of police departments in this county about cases going through. How do you go about building those relationships?
Right.
That partnership, as you said. I mean, you talked about some of the whole things, the ride-alongs and the like. How would you? What other policies would you implement to encourage that?
Well, for one thing, you have your prosecutors go out to different agencies and offer training, because cops know a lot, but prosecutors have to know the law. And so the experienced field and law enforcement officers has to be blended with the legal knowledge of procedure and what gets evidence thrown out that prosecutors can bring. So you encourage prosecutors to spend time in the agencies, informally and formally, offering instruction. There's a lot of cases that are dismissed, and there's no way that you could offer feedback on every case that's dismissed. But the idea would be, if you have police officers who put a lot of work in a case, and they create this package and they present it to the district attorney's office, and that case either gets dismissed or reduced to some much lesser offense, there needs to be communication back to the officers that worked on that case to explain why that happened. One of the complaints that I've heard over the last year and a half of campaigning is that right now officers just aren't getting any feedback. And you can't address every case, and every case that gets dismissed isn't going to get a call back to the officers. But there are learning situations, and there needs to be the environment fostered where, one, prosecutors are encouraged to spend time with law enforcement officers in terms of professionally, and encouraged to return those phone calls. And if something goes wrong in a case, you go back to that officer or officers that worked with it and explain what happened and figure out what could be done differently so you don't have the same train wreck twice. After a trial, no matter whether it's won or lost, there's not that many trials, so this is a very workable solution. Have a debriefing session with the officers that were involved in the case, and especially the ones who testified. And so you've got the officers and the prosecutors there in a room that talk about how the case played out, what worked, and what problems were. If there was evidence that the state wanted to introduce but they couldn't, then that needs to be addressed. And I think fostering that relationship is a cooperative thing, and just telling your people, spend time with law enforcement agencies, spend time out there, talk to them about the law, let them talk to you about reality on the street so that you know what it's like when you get these cases. That'll make a big difference in that.
There is some discussion within Harris County about how to handle public defense.
Mm-hmm.
The ongoing debate about public defender's office versus the system that's currently used in Galveston County, which is the lawyers are in a pool.
Right.
And obviously, if anything like that happened, the DA wouldn't have any say. Wouldn't have any authority over that new office. But as a district attorney, how would you rate the two systems, the current pool system versus a public defender's office? And obviously, there's not cases of public defender's office around here, but how do you look at that process?
I'm not opposed to the idea of a public defender's office, but in my 8.5 years as an appellate prosecutor, I've handled tons of claims brought by convicted people who came back and say that my lawyer was ineffective. And my experience has been that appointed lawyers are almost overwhelmingly just as good, if not better, than a lot of retained lawyers. That's because the appointed lawyers do this all the time. They know the environment that they work in, they know the court, they know how the DA's office works in terms of its policies and procedures. And so appointed lawyers are they're equipped. Now, there's good and bad. There's good and bad private retained lawyers, and there's good and bad appointed lawyers. My experience has been that appointed lawyers do a very good job.